Hurting a chosen one is not just a personal offense, it is a direct challenge to God's plan, and heaven will not stay silent. Many people underestimate what it means when someone is truly chosen by God. They look at the outside appearance, they see the struggles, the flaws, or the seasons of testing, and they mistake the chosen for ordinary people. They forget that when God places His seal on someone's life, when He marks them for a higher purpose, He is not just calling them into destiny but also surrounding them with divine protection. The chosen may be vulnerable in the eyes of man. They may look weak, they may even be in a place of suffering or wilderness, but heaven sees them differently. Heaven recognizes them as vessels of divine assignment, and anyone who lifts a hand, a word, or even a thought of malice against them is not merely opposing flesh and blood, they are opposing the will of the Almighty. This is why it is such a dangerous thing to harm a chosen one, because the harm does not end with the human act, it is answered by the spiritual consequence that comes from God Himself. The Bible makes this clear when it says, "Touch not my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm." That is not just a poetic statement, it is a divine law. It is God declaring a warning to the world that there is a line you cannot cross without provoking heaven. The chosen are the apple of God's eye, which means to strike them is to strike God's vision itself. That is why those who conspire against the chosen find themselves facing battles they never expected, doors closing in their lives, confusion overtaking them, and circumstances they cannot explain. It is not coincidence, it is consequence. When you challenge a chosen one, you are pulling yourself into a war you cannot win, because it is no longer between you and them, it is between you and God. There are countless examples throughout history and scripture that reveal this principle. Think of Joseph, hated by his brothers because of a favor on his life. They thought they were simply betraying a brother, but what they did was set themselves against God's plan. They threw him into a pit, they sold him into slavery, they lied to their father, and in every act of cruelty, they believed they were erasing his destiny. But heaven was watching, and heaven did not stay silent. God raised Joseph in the very land of his captivity, placed him in authority over those who once despised him, and eventually used him as the instrument to save the very family that betrayed him. His brothers learned that harming a chosen one is never the end of the story, it only provokes God to rewrite it in such a way that His chosen is elevated and their enemies are humbled. The same truth is seen in the story of Moses. Pharaoh thought he was simply resisting a man, a leader of slaves demanding freedom. He hardened his heart and mocked the power of God, not realizing that to oppose Moses was to oppose God Himself. What happened? Heaven did not stay silent. The waters turned to blood, plagues overtook the land, darkness covered Egypt, and death struck the firstborn. Pharaoh's pride led him to chase Moses into the sea, but the waters that parted for the chosen crushed the one who rose against him. That is the weight of harming a chosen one. You step into a fight that is not yours, and you drown in battles that are not meant for you. Even David, before he became king, was hunted by Saul. Saul thought he was protecting his throne, but what he was really doing was fighting against God's anointed. Every attempt to kill David ended in failure, because heaven was shielding him. Every arrow missed, every trap was exposed, every scheme collapsed. And when Saul fell on the battlefield, it was not David who destroyed him, it was the justice of God. This shows us that the chosen do not need to retaliate. They do not need to avenge themselves, because God takes their battles personally. Hurting a chosen one does not always come in the form of physical violence. Sometimes it is betrayal, gossip, lies, or attempts to undermine them. Words spoken against them may seem light, but in the spirit, they carry weight. Every false accusation, every mocking tone, every act of sabotage is seen by God, and the response is not delayed forever. God rises to defend His own in His perfect timing. That is why some people find themselves blocked, losing peace, wandering in confusion, because they touched what they should have left alone. They interfered with someone who was under the covering of God, and that is a battle no human can win. What makes this even more powerful is that chosen ones often do not look like what people expect. They might be the quiet one in the family, the overlooked one in the workplace, the one struggling through trials, or the one society dismisses. Yet those very people may carry the heaviest mantle. When you judge them wrongly and act against them, you are not just hurting them, you are dishonoring the God who placed his calling on them. Heaven does not overlook dishonor toward the chosen, because dishonor toward them is dishonor toward God's will. Chosen ones themselves often don't realize how protected they are. They may feel the sting of betrayal, the pain of lies, the heartbreak of rejection, but they don't always see the unseen hands of God working behind the scenes. While enemies plot, God is setting traps for the enemies themselves. While others try to bury them, God is preparing their resurrection. While people try to silence them, God is amplifying their voice. Hurting them may cause temporary pain, but in the end, it results in their elevation and the downfall of those who thought they could stop them. This is why hurting a chosen one is not just about that moment, it is about challenging eternity. You cannot cancel what God has ordained. You cannot erase what God has written. You cannot destroy what God has sealed. Those who try find themselves fighting shadows they cannot overcome, because the battle is spiritual, and they are powerless without God's covering. Heaven does not stay silent because heaven has invested too much in the chosen. Their lives are tied to the fulfillment of divine promises, and God will not allow those promises to be mocked or destroyed. So when someone dares to hurt a chosen one, whether through cruelty, betrayal, manipulation, or even envy, they set themselves against the throne of God. They are saying to the Almighty, "I will undo what you have done." And God answers with power, with signs, with shifts in circumstances that reveal his hand. Sometimes he does it openly, and sometimes quietly, but always surely. The chosen do not need to shout for vengeance. They only need to stand still, because heaven will not stay silent. Every wound inflicted on a chosen one is recorded, and God himself steps in to fight their battles and bring divine justice. Nothing that happens to the chosen ever escapes the eye of heaven. Every tear shed, every betrayal endured, every blow absorbed, every word spoken against them is not forgotten. People may think they are getting away with mistreating or harming someone who carries God's mark, but in reality they are writing their own judgment, because heaven is a witness to it all. God sees what is done in secret. He hears what is whispered in the dark. He observes every plot, every scheme, every weapon formed, and while it may seem for a moment that the chosen are left unprotected, in truth they are under the watchful gaze of the Almighty who keeps record of every injustice. The chosen may cry in silence, feeling abandoned, but their cries echo in the throne room of God. Every time a chosen one is hurt, the sound of their pain travels into eternity. And God does not dismiss it. He gathers their tears, he writes their story, and he prepares his response. That is why those who wound the chosen end up facing storms in their own lives, because God himself has stepped into the fight. The chosen are not required to retaliate or defend themselves with human strength, because the God of justice is their defender, and his justice is not like the justice of men. Men may overlook, men may excuse, men may forget, but God is righteous and his scales are perfectly balanced. Every act of harm against a chosen one tilts the scale, and heaven rises to correct it with divine precision. Look at Job, a man who was chosen not for his perfection but for his faithfulness. The enemy touched his health, his family, his wealth, and even used people to wound him with words, telling him he was cursed, telling him he had sinned, telling him God had abandoned him. But every word spoken against Job was recorded, every wound he endured was measured by God, And when the time of testing was complete, God himself stepped in. He restored Job's life double. He silenced his accusers, and he proved that his chosen could not be destroyed. Those who spoke against Job were later required to bring offerings, and it was Job who prayed for them, because God had shown that the chosen cannot be harmed without consequence. When Hannah cried out in the temple, mocked by Peninnah for her barrenness, every insult cut deeply into her spirit. People saw only a woman without children, but God saw a chosen vessel through whom he would bring forth Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings. Every mocking word spoken against Hannah was recorded. God heard her silent prayers and answered her not only with a child, but with a son who would change the course of Israel. The wounds inflicted upon her became the very reason for her breakthrough, because God turned her pain into purpose. This shows that every harm suffered by the chosen is transformed into a testimony of God's power. Jesus himself, the ultimate chosen one, endured wounds beyond what any human can imagine, betrayed with a kiss by Judas, denied by Peter, abandoned by his disciples, mocked by soldiers, beaten, spit upon, crowned with thorns, nailed to a cross. Every wound inflicted upon him was not just cruelty, it was recorded in heaven as part of the great plan of redemption. His suffering was not overlooked, it became the very foundation of salvation. What men thought was harm became the fulfillment of divine justice, because God stepped in to raise him on the third day. This reveals the greatest truth: no wound inflicted upon the chosen is wasted. Every one of them is transformed into glory when God rises to fight their battle. The chosen often walk through seasons of loneliness, where it seems as if no one stands with them. They are betrayed by friends, misunderstood by family, attacked by strangers. These wounds cut deep, and in human eyes, they look like weakness, but in God's eyes, they are seeds. Every betrayal plants the seed for elevation. Every attack plants the seed for promotion. Every rejection plants the seed for direction. The wounds of the chosen are not the end of the story, they are the beginning of God's intervention. He is not silent, he is recording every detail and waiting for the appointed time to release his justice. Think of Daniel, thrown into the lion's den for refusing to compromise his faith. Those who plotted against him thought they had succeeded in silencing him. But every scheme was seen by God. The den was sealed, but heaven was open, and angels were sent to shut the mouths of lions. The very men who accused Daniel were later thrown into the same lion's den, proving that God himself had stepped in to bring justice. The wound intended for Daniel became a testimony of God's power, and the harm intended against him returned upon his enemies. The chosen are often misunderstood because people see their struggles without seeing their covering. They assume that hurting them carries no consequence, but the truth is that harming them is writing a debt that only God can repay, and God does repay. He steps into time with justice that cannot be resisted. Sometimes that justice comes as exposure, where hidden plots are revealed for all to see. Sometimes it comes as reversal, where the chosen is lifted up and the one who harmed them is brought low. Sometimes it comes as silence, where the chosen is preserved and their enemies are left to fight battles they cannot overcome. But in every case, God himself is the one who fights, and his justice is complete. David understood this when he refused to harm Saul, even though Saul was trying to kill him. David knew that every wound inflicted on him was recorded, and that he did not need to avenge himself. He said, "May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you." This reveals the heart of the chosen. They trust God's justice more than their own. They know that the wounds they endure are not wasted. They are written in heaven's book, and God will balance the scales at the right time. There are moments when the chosen cry out, asking why God allows the harm in the first place. They wonder why he doesn't stop the betrayal, why he doesn't silence the lies, why he doesn't shield them from every attack. But the truth is that God allows some wounds because he intends to use them as evidence of his glory. When Joseph was betrayed, it positioned him for the palace. When Esther risked her life before the king, it positioned her to save her people. When Paul was imprisoned, it positioned him to write letters that still shape the church today. The wounds of the chosen are not signs of defeat. They are the very stages upon which God demonstrates his victory. Every time someone wounds a chosen one, they are writing a testimony they will one day witness. They may laugh in the moment, but they will tremble when God's justice is revealed. The chosen will stand, healed and elevated, while those who mocked them will see that their words and actions were not forgotten. This is why the chosen are told to hold their peace, because their defender is not man, it is God himself. His justice is not partial, it is not delayed forever, it comes at the perfect time, and when it comes, it leaves no doubt that the chosen were always under his protection. The chosen are a reflection of God's covenant, and God does not allow his covenant to be mocked. Every wound inflicted on them becomes an opportunity for God to reveal his faithfulness. That is why the chosen often rise stronger after every battle. People wonder how they survived, how they healed, how they kept going, but the truth is that they did not stand in their own strength. They stood because heaven was fighting for them. They stood because God himself had taken their wounds and turned them into weapons. They stood because justice was already at work in ways unseen. So when a chosen one is hurt, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually, it is not forgotten. Heaven records it, God responds to it, and divine justice follows it. The chosen do not need to defend themselves, because their defense is written in the hand of God. Every wound inflicted on them becomes a witness that calls forth heaven's response. Every attack against them becomes an invitation for God to demonstrate his power. Every betrayal becomes a setup for restoration. This is the reality of the chosen life. Via God himself fights their battles, and his justice cannot be denied. When people rise against a chosen one, they are not fighting flesh and blood but the power and covering of God, and the consequences can be unshakable. Many people make the mistake of believing that because the chosen are human, they can be handled, mistreated, or attacked without repercussions. They see their humanity, they see their struggles, they see their imperfections, and they assume that the chosen stand alone. But what they fail to see is the invisible shield around them, the covering of heaven that surrounds their lives like a wall of fire. Rising against them may look like a battle against a person, but in truth, it is a battle against the God who appointed them, against the Spirit who empowers them, against the destiny that cannot be erased, and no human hand, no earthly weapon, no scheme of man can overthrow the covering of the Almighty. The world has always underestimated the chosen because of their outward appearance. Joseph's brothers underestimated him because he was young and favored. Saul underestimated David because he was a shepherd boy. The Philistines underestimated him because he was small compared to Goliath. The Jews underestimated Jesus because he came as a carpenter's son. Men see weakness, but God sees his own power reflected in them. When someone rises against a chosen one, they are in reality trying to contend with God's choice, and no one has ever prevailed against God's choice. Pharaoh tried and drowned. Haman tried and hung on the gallows he prepared for another. Goliath tried and fell by the stone of a boy. Herod tried and was struck down. Every example in history shows the same truth. It is not the chosen who fall. It is those who rise against them. The reason for this is that chosen ones are not sustained by their own strength. They are sustained by the Spirit of God. To attack them is to challenge the Spirit. To curse them is to curse what God has blessed. To oppose them is to resist the very will of heaven. And the consequences are not light. They shake lives, families, nations. Because when God defends his chosen, he does not defend halfway. He defends with finality. That is why enemies of the chosen often find themselves facing storms they cannot explain, sicknesses they cannot heal, financial collapses they cannot recover from, and losses they cannot prevent. These are not coincidences, they are the unshakable consequences of touching what God has covered. Think of the children of Israel in the wilderness. When nations rose against them, they thought they were fighting wandering tribes. They did not see that they were contending with the God who led them by cloud and fire. Those who attacked Israel found themselves crushed, scattered, destroyed, because the chosen carry more than their own identity. They carry the covenant of God. To oppose them is to oppose the covenant, and the covenant cannot be broken. This is why Balaam, when hired to curse Israel, could not do it. He opened his mouth to curse, but blessings flowed instead. He discovered that when someone is chosen, they cannot be cursed, because the covering of God transforms every attempt of harm into fuel for greater favor. The covering of the chosen is invisible but undeniable. You cannot see it with human eyes, but you cannot deny its effects. Enemies plan, but their plans collapse. Traps are set, but the chosen walk past them unharmed. Words are spoken, but they return void. Weapons are formed, but they do not prosper. This is not because the chosen are strong in themselves, it is because they are wrapped in the mantle of divine preservation. God himself has drawn a line around them, and whoever crosses that line does so at their own peril. This is why some people's lives fall apart not long after they rise against the chosen. They may lie, they may betray, they may strike, but soon after, things begin to unravel. It is not the chosen they are wrestling with, it is God. And no one has ever wrestled with God and walked away victorious. The consequences of such battles are heavy. They may lose influence, they may lose peace, they may lose their position, they may even lose their very lives, because they chose to rise against someone who was never standing alone in the first place. Jesus made it clear when he told Saul on the road to Damascus, "Why are you persecuting me?" Notice he did not say, "Why are you persecuting my followers?" Or "Why are you persecuting my people?" He said, "Why are you persecuting me?" Because when you rise against the chosen, you are rising against the one who sent them. To persecute them is to persecute him. That is why the consequences are unshakable. You are not dealing with human retaliation, you are dealing with divine response. Saul thought he was dragging Christians into prison, but he was fighting against Christ himself. And in one encounter, he was struck blind, knocked down, and forced to face the truth that opposing the chosen is opposing the Creator. The chosen may look vulnerable, they may be quiet, humble, even struggling, but do not mistake humility for weakness. Do not mistake silence for absence. Do not mistake patience for passivity. Behind their stillness is a God who fights, a God who sees, a God who defends with power. The chosen are like lambs in appearance but lions in the spirit, because the Lion of Judah roars on their behalf. When people rise against them, they are not entering a fair fight, they are stepping into a battle against eternity, and eternity never loses. This is why the chosen are told to stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. They do not need to raise their hand in vengeance, because God himself raises his hand. And when his hand moves, no one can withstand it. Those who rise against them may gather armies, but those armies will scatter. They may boast in their power, but that power will crumble. They may believe they have the upper hand, but it will turn against them, because the chosen are not ordinary. They are hidden in the shadow of the Almighty, and to touch them is to touch the apple of his eye. Many times, enemies of the chosen believe they are winning because they see temporary suffering. They see the chosen lose a job, lose a friend, lose opportunities, and they laugh, thinking their attack succeeded. But what they do not realize is that the chosen's suffering is only the stage for God's glory. Just when they think the chosen are finished, God lifts them higher than before. Joseph's brothers thought they buried him in slavery, But God elevated him to governor. Haman thought he destroyed Mordecai, but God honored him before the king. The Pharisees thought they silenced Jesus, but God raised him from the dead. The pattern never changes. The chosen rise, and their enemies fall. The consequences of rising against the chosen are not only personal, they can be generational. Families have carried curses because of the way they treated God's anointed. Nations have fallen because they rose against God's people. Pharaoh's Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, all of them discovered that no throne, no army, no empire can survive opposing the covering of God. What they built crumbled, what they boasted and turned to dust, because they fought against something they could not overthrow. When someone rises against the chosen, they put their own legacy at risk, because God's defense is not limited to a moment, it echoes through generations. This truth should humble everyone who encounters a chosen one. It should teach reverence, caution, and fear of God, because when you see someone marked by heaven, you are not just looking at a person, you are looking at destiny wrapped in human form. To mistreat them is to insult the one who sent them. To oppose them is to resist the kingdom of God itself, and that kingdom does not bow to any man. The chosen may walk through valleys, they may sit in prisons, they may endure seasons of silence, but they are never abandoned. God walks with them, and his covering never departs. Those who rise against them in those seasons think they are safe because they strike when the chosen appear weak, but their strike becomes their snare. Because the covering of God does not lift in the valley, it shines brighter there. It does not vanish in prison, it grows stronger there. It does not weaken in silence, it becomes louder there. The chosen carry the presence of God, and that presence cannot be overthrown. This is why the consequences of fighting them are unshakable. You cannot undo what God has decreed. You cannot silence what he has called. You cannot kill what he has ordained to live. You cannot curse what he has blessed. The chosen are carried by a force greater than armies, greater than wealth, greater than influence, and to rise against them is to invite collapse, because no one who has ever fought against God has stood in victory. Chosen ones, you must always remember that your life is not ordinary, your steps are not random, and your journey is not without purpose. Every pain, every wound, every season of testing has been seen and recorded by God, and none of it will ever be wasted. Those who have risen against you, those who tried to harm you, those who thought they could block your destiny will one day see that they were not fighting you, but the God who chose you. You are protected, you are covered, and you are carried by a power that no enemy can overthrow. Never doubt the hand of God over your life, for his justice is perfect, his timing is exact, and his promises are unshakable. I want to thank each of you for listening with your heart, for receiving these words, and for allowing this message to remind you of who you are. You are the chosen, and heaven fights for you. Stay strong, stay faithful, and stay aligned with God's purpose for your life. May his favor surround you, may his protection keep you, and may his light guide you every step of the way. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your spirit in joining this message today. Until we meet again, may God bless you, may he keep you, and may his peace always rest upon you. Goodbye, and thank you.